Hello everyone and welcome to, well, the very first MMO concept video, if you will. This is the initial story proposal. And what we're going to be doing in this video is going over an initial proposal for the MMO story, for the MMO that we're looking at creating. Zach has put this together and we have discussed it lightly here at the 3D Buzz headquarters. And we now have some of the students that are students that have been with us for quite some time before this class even came about that had volunteered to help with the construction of the MMO. So they are joining us in this classroom, and currently everybody is muted with the exception of us, just to keep things nice and organized. Now, in this video, Zach will be delivering the proposal in a particular manner, which he's going to discuss in just a moment. And then the next video, that's where we're going to start going through the various iterations. We'll be discussing with students that are with us in the classroom. Also, those of you out there that are in the MMO forum, so also students that aren't always able to make any kind of public class that we may hold. You'll be able to go in there and throw your own suggestions in. And we're going to spend this week pretty much just massaging the story and getting a story that we really like. Before we start talking anything about the game, we need a world that we're happy with. Right. That's important to me. Now, there's probably a lot of people, Zach, out there that are new to our recording style. You know, right now they're looking at a Photoshop.
Yeah, they're probably scared. They're looking at the blue screen of death or something.
Thinking, you know, what's this? When we do our videos, this is really important to understand. We just try to, you know, make the entire experience casual. We find that for most people, that is a much better, let me go ahead and deselect that for you. That is a much better learning environment, much better experience is what people get out of it. So we're going to continue doing things exactly like that. Let's see. Also, one other thing that I wanted to talk about, because this was mentioned right before we began recording. When we do normal 3D Buzz training videos, one of the things that happens from time to time is that there is a mess up that's big enough that we want to, well, stop the recording and restart it.
Yeah, we hardly ever edit our stuff, but we are known to
every now and then. If it's something major.
Yeah.
One of the things that here at 3D Buzz we had to agree on when we first discussed doing the MMO class is that since the idea was for it to be as if there was a camera over our shoulders and we're just talking out loud as we're doing everything, so people would learn from what we're doing, but at the same time we're not really teaching, even though there will end up being some teaching in this. I just know how it goes. We could not re-record anything, meaning if we got to a spot and something was just completely messed up, no stopping, re-recording, for the simple fact that that would take what's probably already going to be a 1,000-hour class. I have no idea how long this class will be, but it would just really add to the amount of work that had to be done. So this whole thing is being shot live right now, and if there are any mess-ups or anything, that's just how it goes.
And hopefully you all already understand that from the introductory video.
That's right.
That we'll be putting together. We're just kind of reiterating in case, because I know there's going to be at least one or two folks out there who skip that.
That's right.
So just so you know, this is a very laid-back environment. We have a little whiteboard where I'll be writing notes live on the fly, at least for the first part of this video, and we're going to do this a lot throughout the series. It's just, you know, when you go into a classroom, you generally have somebody who goes up to a whiteboard and writes up notes, and you should probably be writing them down too. And this little Photoshop setup we have here allows us to do the same thing.
And again, since this is a real development, when you're meeting with a design team that's putting together the story, or even if they're working on systems, different teams of programmers, you still usually have some sort of whiteboard and lots of drawing and, you know, trying to visually communicate ideas, data flow, etc.
I just want to mention that our whiteboard is superior, though, because it is in fact blue.
So with that, Zach, go ahead and talk a little bit about what you have planned in this session and how we like to visually communicate our ideas around here.
Well, what I'm going to be doing in this video is going over the key ideas behind our story. When we sat down and decided we were going to make an MMO, we unanimously agreed that a story should come first. Build your world, and then build your game upon your world.
That's right.
That was the whole kit and caboodle. We didn't want to just start off and go like, oh, well, how should the game play? What should the gameplay elements be? What kind of races and classes and combat? No. Figure out the world first, and then place your game within that world. Now, to that end, I was actually tasked with drafting out something to get us started from. Now, I want to say this If speech could somehow be put into bold text, what I'm about to say needs to be in bold text that blinks between neon green and neon red or something. But this is just a proposed story outline.
That's right.
We're going to be discussing this with our team of developers, with our creative minds, so to speak, so that we can determine what's working, what's not, what people like, what they don't like. What I didn't want is for us to start this production with no idea whatsoever, and to have a group of people all just throwing darts against a wall with no lights on, so I have no idea what they're hitting.
Right.
So this is just a way for us to have a very, very general direction. What you're about to see me present could be entirely destroyed. And that's totally okay. I don't want anybody to watch this video and say, oh, well, this is exactly the game they're going to be making. Not at all. This is just a way to get us rolling.
That's right. Though hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have a very good idea of the game that we are creating.
Right. Something that we can actually draft into a more professional document that could be handed around, and people could go from there with a clear idea of what the world's going to be like.
Now, you did say developers a second ago and designers, and that does bring up something very interesting. I did refer to our developers and designers that are joining us right now as students, and this is a very unique situation. While everyone that is joining us right now are students, I would also like to remind everybody that Lee, who's also with us, hey Lee,
hello,
and Zach and myself, we are students as well for this entire project, for the simple fact that while we wear a lot of hats, we don't wear every single hat, and so the development of this MMO over the next however long it takes to put together is going to be put together by people that are experts in different areas. And so, joining us tonight, I just wanted to quickly throw out a quick hello to these people and let everyone know that we've got Mr. Andrew Brown with us. We've got Andrew Thompson with us. We've got NATO Chris Morris with us. Mr. Derek Stevens, which many of you guys know. We also have Fat Gav, or Mr. Gavin, and also Matt Brummett, who we often call Matt Damon in, well, many of our videos. They have all taken the time to join us tonight. Mr. Leonard Helmrest was not able to make it tonight, but we should see him on the next video. And that's pretty much the core of the team at the moment. Now, at the same time, we would like to consider all of our students core members of the team if they want to contribute ideas and suggestions, though we've already made it clear that students do not have to participate and they do not have to contribute. That's up to you guys. But anyways, we got to have a starting point, and here we are. So I think we've kind of yammered on long enough for the intro. So with that, Zach, let me go ahead and turn it on over to you for some of the meat in this video.
All right, well, what I'm not going to be doing in this video is sitting down behind Word and just writing something out. Now, I'll admit, there are occasions where I will do that. Sometimes the muse is upon me, so to speak, and so I just immediately have an idea, and I start typing, and stuff starts flowing, and then you edit and rewrite and all that kind of thing. But I don't really think that's an efficient way to work. One of my favorite things to do when I'm trying to flesh out an idea really quickly and see how things are related and interconnected is to do a mind map. Now, I have just recently discovered that not as many people as I thought knew what a mind map was.
I know. I was really blown away by that.
I've been using these since grade school. Of course, they were presented to me when I was very young. It just turns out not everybody's seen them before. Now, I come to all of you from a collegiate background in graphic design, and they're a must in the design world, and I'm sure in any design. You really need to know how to do these. But what I want to do in just a couple of minutes is give you a really quick rundown of what a mind map is, in case you've never seen one before. And if you have seen one, you want to reach down and just, except unless you're watching this live, of course, if you want to just scrub forward for the next couple of minutes and skip this, I totally understand. What a mind map is a graphical representation of an idea so that you can see how various pieces of that idea interrelate to one another. There's no right or wrong way to make one, but here's just a really quick example. Let's say we want to kind of consider the idea of camping. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with our story. This is just an example of a mind map in general. And so you'd start off with the idea of camping, and you can put that in the middle of your map, and that's a ridiculously oversized circle. So, sorry, I'm going to immediately take that back out and make something a little smaller and save myself a little bit of precious screen space. We'll make our G look a little more presentable. Now, what kind of things do you immediately relate to camping?
And this is the key concept when working with mind maps.
Yep.
You start thinking, the next high-level thing.
This is general.
First thing comes to my mind, equipment.
Yep. You need equipment, so boom. So we can go boom, write out an idea called equipment, and then that branches off.
Lee, what comes to mind?
Equipment? Tent.
No, other high-level stuff. Camping equipment.
Location.
Location.
I like that. Now let's just go here.
And this is how we really do it around here with many of the different things that we've put together in the past.
You guys got to understand, I'm 3 hands short of what I need right now. So
here,
you want to hold that for me?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Now I'm going to slide this over to the side. Actually, no, I'm not. I got to get a little fancy real quick. So let's use Photoshop for everything it's good for. We'll slide this over here. Now, my mind maps, generally, if I'm putting them on paper, and I do a lot of them on paper, or at least I used to before I started finding software to do them for me, they'll go off in every single direction. Just for this example, I've got one that's kind of going to move off to the
we'll
right.
Just flow to the right.
Yeah, but there's no right or wrong way to do these. So, what kind of things do you generally associate
switch back over to
with?
brush. First thing that comes to mind: tent.
Yeah, you got to have a tent. So, boom, and that branches off of equipment. Now, maybe you need, I don't know, a canteen. I don't know why, but. And you could probably branch that down further, like something you need to sleep in,
I would say,
hike in, or
exactly. Instead of canteen, it could be what kind of cooking equipment, etc. But
yeah, well, and you could do that. You could just turn this into another branch. So cooking equipment could be, like that fork that you put your little hot dogs on, and then. I don't know, some sort of stove-like apparatus. And, of course, there are some people from Britain in the room, so we got to take a kettle with us. So, and you get the idea here. And there's location. Well, do you want to
I said we want to go up in the mountains.
I was going to say, yeah, it's got to be mountains.
Or do we feel like camping on the beach this weekend?
Oh, you're killing me.
Because that could be really nice.
Beach, and then that deserves a smiley. And sometimes you will put icons in your mind map. But this is just a quick mind map of camping. And, of course, you could take this and branch off of it for days if you wanted to, with each and every little thing. Like there could be another branch right off of camping that could be activities. And that could be, that could contain...
Whitewater rafting.
Rafting. And I'm running out of room, so my writing's going to get terrible. So just bear with me.
Hiking.
Yep. And you see how this goes. I mean, we're just webbing outward.
What is really cool with the software that Zach is about to show you guys is when we're sitting around just trying to come up with ideas or features for a system, we like doing this because it lets us all visually see stuff quickly. So while we might be looking at activities kind of up in the corner, I'm still looking at tent, and I may give Zach some quick idea, or that may give me some inspiration for an idea that I toss out to Zach, and he can just quickly go up to tent and throw something in.
Exactly. Is it a dome tent? Is it one of those, like house-style tents?
Yeah, who knows?
But it's that cool tent out of Harry Potter that had rooms inside.
And now mind maps can be used in a lot of different manners. If you get on the internet and you start looking around, you can find some amazing mind maps. There's some software, there's free software out there where, like Java applications, where there are tons of mind maps that have already been done that you can look through, and some of them act as references. So you could have something that's where Zach started here at the center and it says camping, instead it says C#. And then the major categories right off of C# could be things like types, keywords, and
syntax.
You could take types and open it up, and then you could go from there into an int, float, your string, etc. You can also tell stories as well, and
I love using them for stories.
Absolutely. So they're very, very powerful, and the only reason we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about them here is because we're going to be using them a lot.
Now, when we make our map here in just a moment, we're going to be using a piece of software called NovaMind, which is up to version 5 at the moment. You do not have to go out and buy this if you don't want to.
No, not
it
at
has
all.
a 30-day trial if you want to play with it, and I highly recommend that you do. It's a killer piece of software. But there's no reason why you can't do everything we're going to do with good old-fashioned pen and paper.
That's right.
So that's like the cheapest version of NovaMind you can possibly get. And I've done so many mind maps on pen and paper, it's just ridiculous, and I highly recommend you do the same.
Now, if you happen to have an iPhone or an iPad, there's a bunch of different mind map applications.
But here's the one I'm going to pimp.
Yep. Which is the one I pimped to Zach some time back.
Yep.
It's absolutely amazing. Thoughts.
I'm totally addicted to it. It does really nice mind maps right in the palm of your hand if you're using your iPhone or iPad. And then it reads NovaMind files natively, so you can really work very nicely in between the two.
Right. So with that being the case, let's go ahead and switch over now.
Let's see here.
So,
there's NovaMind.
So this is what you get, basically, when you first start NovaMind. And let's see, Zach is now working the whiteboard.
Yeah, I'm going to put the whiteboard away, and I'm going to scoot up here.
I guess I can...
No, actually, I brought my little stand thingy. I just got to... Oh, yeah, right here. Look at that.
All right.
So if you guys hear all kinds of shuffling and everything, just keep in mind this is kind of an organic process. Now, this is NovaMind. I'm not really here to teach you NovaMind. If you want to get it, I will try to at least call out hotkeys that I'm using.
Yeah, just to
help you out. But this is not a NovaMind VTM.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
Also, I just want to say real quick that NovaMind has, as Zach said, a 30-day trial, but also if you get just the cheap version, which should pretty much handle everything you want to do, it's like $49 US dollars.
And I realize it's expensive for some folks, but
yes,
really,
for sure.
I think if you try it out, if this type of idea management really works for you, then I highly suggest you consider budgeting for it.
Yeah, but there are free ones out there.
There are free ones out there too. I happen to like NovaMind. I like how they're kind of integrating it into the whole new Windows scheme. But I know some folks hate the ribbon.
Like me.
Anyways, Jason. All right, so here's our first thing. Now, when we first opened this up, I really hate the way this looks. I don't know why. The great big bright sheet of white is just a horrible eyesore for me. So I'm going to start off just right-click and go to Format Background. I like something in the dark gray realm of things, so I'll close that, and then I'm going to jump over to Map Design, and there's a simple setting. I like this, and you can, if you want to get in and play with all the different ones, of course, you're more than welcome. I'm going to go to Colors, and I'm going to set this to Business Red. There's just something about dark with red. It just makes me happy. All right, so now, where do we begin? And that's one of the biggest questions that is going to plague you when you start creating a mind map like this, and I'm going to just stress to you, there is no right or wrong answer for where you begin, because you can always just jot down whatever's in your mind right now, and if you need to step back and kind of go toward a more beginning or more general area, do it.
And in our case here, of course, we're wanting to talk about the story, story elements, so we can start out by just simply calling this the MMO story elements.
Right. Wow. I'm going to mistype things all throughout this, and I'll try to correct them. If I make a typo that just stays on the screen, please don't give me any flack. I'm sure none of you have ever made typos in your life, but I do on occasion. All right, so we've got our central area defined. Now, I don't want my entire story to branch completely off of this. What I want to do here is just get down some of the real basics that we wanted when we even decided we wanted a story.
So this does go back a little bit into some of the history of where we are today. And that is, what kind of MMO did we want? Now, of course, there are so many MMOs that are now out there that are fantasy-based MMOs. We have World of Warcraft being the leading MMO. And, you know, millions upon millions of subscribers and hundreds of thousands, if not, you know, millions of active players. And yeah, there's so many of them. But
most of the big ones that I can think of are fantasy-based. It's a popular format.
We did do a poll on the front page of 3D Buzz that has what's more around 3,000 votes, and we had fantasy holding the lead for a while. Then we had science fiction holding the lead for a while. But the two topics, those two particular genres, stayed very close to one another. Very close.
And I love that they're vague enough that you can really interpret them in any way that you like.
And of course, we're wanting to make a game that we will enjoy playing. And again, fantasy's been done to death.
It has.
So what we were interested in was something sci-fi related, but sci-fi fantasy is awesome. For those of you that are familiar with Shadowrun.
Well, that's like hard. Some people will say that's cyberpunk, and
I know
cyberpunk is sci-fi. As far as I'm concerned,
that gets into a whole new realm of arguments. With
and we're not here to argue that sort of thing,
right?
You know, a lot of you will probably, when I say science fiction, you probably immediately think of spaceships. I think Orson Scott Card, in one of his forewords in the Ender's Game series, said it best. Fantasy is forests and trees, and science fiction is rivets.
There you go.
And if you can keep that straight, everything just kind of follows. But what we decided was that we couldn't decide. We couldn't decide if we wanted to go hardcore science fiction or hardcore fantasy. And so what we decided is to try a hybrid. I mean, why not? So let's just start there. Now, what I'm going to do here in NovaMind is hit the insert key, and that's just going to fire off a subtopic, as you see here. So let's just start off by saying science fiction, and we'll press enter. And then I'm going to press enter again. That'll make another subtopic, and this will be fantasy. Now, these are huge, vast generalizations. You guys have to know that going in. Now, I'm going to graft fantasy back over here on the other side. So we have fantasy on one side, we have science fiction on the other.
Yeah, so for the people who play this out there, we're trying to completely separate the idea. So if you're into fantasy, well, what kind of things are we going to deal with in fantasy? Sci-fi,
That's right.
Same thing.
That's right. And I'm not really even talking about story
Not
here
yet.
specifically. Just what elements are important in either one of these two genres that we need to keep in mind as we draft out the primary points of our story. And this is where I like to tell people that you don't have to think too hard about what you do in a mind map. Start off as generally as you can think of and just start throwing ideas out there, because those ideas will keep you on track and help you start to focus things down. So let's start over here in the realm of science fiction. What are some things... Oh, excuse me, wrong button. What sort of things are just inherently sci-fi? I'm going to hit insert and bring on a branching subtopic off of science fiction, and we have things like robots. I mean, that's the first thing that always comes to mind for me. Just robots and machines, really. Lasers.
Okay.
Come on, robots and lasers are sci-fi. Well, okay, you're actually missing something. Let me put my lasers back in there. So let's drop that in. We still need spaceships. And with spaceships, I can't type today. We'll also have stations. So spaceships and stations. Right there, I think you pretty much have sci-fi. It's like, I mean, if you really had to boil it down, think Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica. They pretty much have all those things.
Okay.
Except for maybe not so much lasers.
I would put spaceships and stations on, me personally, on two different... what do you think, Lee?
I'd say two different levels.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Well, I'm just really thinking objects in space that people can be on, but sure.
Could be robots.
It could be. It could be. So break that. I actually have a reason for doing that.
Uh-oh. Are we messing up your...
You're kind of messing with my chi flow, but you know what? That's okay. I can cope. Space stations.
We get to do this all live.
Exactly. I like to think of colonies and other planets.
Okay.
Planties. Terraforming, that sort of thing. Another big sci-fi thing that I know it may not exactly relate to traditional sci-fi as the way you think of it, but I know it's related to a lot of sci-fi stories, and I know it's something that we talked about incorporating early on, so I'm just going to jot it down, is a virtual reality kind of world. And I'm not even thinking like Johnny Mnemonic or William Gibson kind of thing, or even so much as The Matrix, though that's very close. I like things, go watch Caprica. And how they pictured that kind of alternate world that you really do kind of put your whole mind into and you experience. I love that kind of thing. And I think you could really have a lot of fun with that in a gaming environment. So I'll go ahead and just jot that down as something we'd like to incorporate. And then just other random things, force fields. Because how do you travel through space without a force field, really? And I know these all look really random, and we could just sit here and go on and on and on with them for hours, probably, if we wanted to. But just start here and just make a list like this. If it starts helping you think of what kind of things do I really want to see, then go on from there. What about cyborg implants? That sounds cool.
Nanotechnology.
Nanotechnology, which is the infinite word for stuff we just don't care to explain.
Oh, we'll explain it all right. Oh, we're going to have some nanotechnology.
Of course.
I'm just saying.
Of course.
I can pull the CEO card for that one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, now these are just some ideas, things that we know we want to incorporate, but let's spend a little bit of time and pay attention to the fantasy world as well. So what ideas, are just inherently attached to the fantasy world? Well, we got things like swords.
First thing that comes to mind to me is just dragons.
Dragons. Actually, I'm gonna kind of generalize that to mythical creatures.
Okay.
Because then you could have your
the
hippogriffs
same for
and
swords
Pegasus
too. weapons, but
yeah, but the sword is just
okay. The symbol of fantasy.
Yeah,
Okay.
you picture the knight with that big sword, and that's because everybody's got weapons. And they use swords these days.
I picture the mage with magic.
Yep, absolutely. And magic's going to be a big one. So let's say magical spells. We have things like, I do realize we should be going into, bows and arrows and, that sort of thing. And so we can just throw that in. There's really not a lot of balance here, and I don't want you to think there needs to be. just have fun with it. Just start writing down everything you can think of.
That's basically what the idea of the mind map is. It's just ideas, because we can go back in and easily restructure, subcategorize, etc.
Creature mounts, people riding on creatures as opposed to, motorcycles or hovering bikes or hang gliders or anything like that. I mean, they have an animal that they ride around on that does something cool. What other things can we think of that are just, let's see, knights in armor. That's
horrible for me to say beer.
I was thinking dungeons.
Beer. Dungeons. I don't care. There's no wrong answers. Get them all out. Everything you can think of. Let's see. What are we... let's just throw it out there. Primitive.
Okay.
It's not high tech. It's not all bright and shiny.
Sure.
It's like maybe a thatch roof, that kind of thing. That sort of primitive world. But here, okay, now we've got a pretty good balance here. In terms of just how much stuff we've listed. And if the stuff you put down doesn't seem to make sense at the moment, I do recommend that you try to at least visually balance as much as you can within reason. Because when you do something like this, unless you're working completely in a vacuum, which I don't recommend, you're going to have to present this idea to somebody. And people respond to much more subtle things than we think they do. And if you're trying to show an idea to someone and there's visual imbalance, if people see a lot of ideas for science fiction and just a few ideas for fantasy, they will immediately respond to that. So try your best to keep your ideas visually balanced within reason, as best you can. I'm not saying kill yourself to make sure you have the exact same number of things. If your OCD kind of kicks in, you're like, oh, well, I have 32 ideas over here. I must have 32 ideas on the other side. It's not that bad.
All right, so now we've jotted some stuff down that we're looking at making its way into story.
Now, from here, the big question is, well, where do you go? Well, this is where you got to kind of think about how do you want to present this, kind of in a gameplay manner. I know we don't really want to go into gameplay, but
we don't want to go into gameplay.
But how does the world need to be presented? Well, what we defined here is literally two entirely different worlds. And it's very difficult to make the two just completely interrelate. I mean, how do you have a world that is primitive and magical living in tandem with a highly technological world?
Okay.
It just doesn't happen by itself. So what you got to do is kind of break down, okay, fine, how did it happen? Well, you're going to have to start with...
Go ahead and get the ribbon to...
Oh, yeah. Actually, I'm going to need it real quick.
Oh, okay. Well, if you're going to need it in a minute, go ahead and leave it up. Then we'll get rid of it in a second.
Because what I need to do, basically, is create a floating topic.
Okay.
And we'll be making a few of these. Now, that's under the insert panel for those of you who are playing with NovaMind. And what I'm going to do is just drop in... Now, here's something... I just want to throw this out, too. Because I know a lot of folks, when they start trying to get creative, have a hard time with names. Names are a really scary thing to broach, and if you're having a hard time coming up with a good name for something, don't worry about naming it. Let's just keep this very simple, at least for a moment. I'll come back and change it probably later, but let's just say sci-fi people.
Okay.
So here's our sci-fi people, and then what I'm going to do is come back and we'll create another floating topic, and we'll just call this fantasy people. Now, me personally, because I am a writer and that sort of thing, I can't just leave it like that for very long. It does drive me crazy sooner or later. So what I've decided, or what I had decided while I was working on this, is that let's consider this like a future Earth kind of world.
Okay.
So we don't have magic here. Now, according to legend, there's all kinds of stories about Merlin, and there was magic at one time. It all depends on what you believe and all that. I don't want to get into all that.
Okay.
I just want to say, okay, so humans continue to do whatever we're doing now, and technology continued to advance, and so these are the people of Earth. The sci-fi people are the people of Earth, and I like, as trite as it may be, I like considering them Terrans.
Okay.
You go with the kind of, Latin version of the word Earth, which is Terra. And then I had to totally come up with a name for these folks, so I don't want to just leave them as fantasy people. That's too generic even
So
for me.
where are you envisioning fantasy people? The people out?
Actually, I want them to be aliens,
Okay.
believe it or not. I want this to take place in a whole other world because it gives us a way to ground it,
Okay.
George Lucas did it best. He came up with all these really weird, outlandish ideas like the Force and Jar Jar Binks and other such horrible things. But he explained it all in the first few seconds of every Star Wars movie by showing some blue text on the screen that said a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
That's true.
Which roughly translates to, I'm going to do whatever I want on the screen and there's nothing you can say about it. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're just going to say there's another planet that's so far away we can't even imagine it. And on it are these fantasy people who I'm just going to call the Elethians. And I don't care if you like that name or don't like that name. All that kind of stuff can change later. But if you can be bothered to come up with a cool name, do it. It'll make you feel better. I promise it will. So what we're going to do is explore both of these two peoples individually,
Okay.
and what kind of defines them. These two people didn't grow up together. They haven't coexisted for very long. I don't want them to, I don't want our story for the game to be in such a way where, oh, well, they've always lived together in relative peace and harmony. No. There's got to be a nice division. And for there to be a division, they have to have only met relatively recently. So let's start off by giving them kind of a back history. So I'm going to start off with the Terrans. Now, you guys have to understand, I have some notes to kind of keep my brain in check. So if there's a pause for just a moment, it's just me kind of, searching through my notes. Now, I am going to be dragging this around a lot, and I'm doing that with the right mouse button if you're following along with NovaMind for the first time. And I'm going to pull this up and kind of out of the way so that we can just focus on the Terrans. I'm going to select this, and I'll press Insert to start off our first subtopic. And again, just start throwing ideas out. Where are the Terrans from? Their home planet. And you can call it Terra if you want, but to keep people you present this to from being too confused, let's go ahead and say it's Earth. And we need to give Earth a reason to have explored the stars. Now, I'm one of those folks I've read enough science fiction to truly believe that mankind will never be able to do anything in terms of getting outside of its own atmosphere until we can at least get together under a single government. Mm-hmm. I don't picture that government being very pretty, but it kind of has to happen. So I've got a generic name for this. We're going to call it the United Terran Hegemony. And it's just, like I said, it's just an idea. You just throw it out there. If you don't like it, get rid of it later or change it. What's another important thing about the Terrans? They use high technology. In fact, in terms of our overall game, that's their whole motif. These are your techno people.
Okay.
Now, some other important things. We want them to have other planetary colonies.
So while with their origins, they come from Earth.
Right.
As of now, they're just...
There's other places, and this is kind of hybridizing what we're accomplishing in a way. Because we're writing a story, but we're also keeping in mind that we're making a game. Mm-hmm. And I don't want our game to only take place on these two planets.
Right, for sure.
So the only way I can conceive of us having other areas to explore is to have some other planets.
Okay.
The only way to do that is to have some colonies. So there you go. It just kind of follows. All right. Now, there's another aspect that's going to be really important to driving forward the story in the midst of an energy crisis. And that only makes sense. I mean, one of the things that actually has popped up recently in, I think it was on Gizmodo when I was reading it, they say there's going to be another several hundred years before we can actually start doing interplanetary travel because we just don't have the energy for it now. So let's assume we come up with some sort of energy means to get out there. But this outward spread of humanity really starts to deplete our energy resources. It's a little bit on the contrived side. I know that's been out there a lot. I mean, Avatar, real quick, easy example. Mm-hmm. But it's also very common and believable because it relates to the human condition right now. We're already in what could be called an energy crisis, and already, having a hard time dealing with what we're doing to the planet and getting what we need out of Mother Earth, so to speak. So these are just some critical ideas that drive the Terrans forward.
Okay.
Now, let's just stop right there, and let's jump over to the Alethians.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to move them kind of up here into their own little world, too. I like the idea of being able to focus, so we'll just kind of put them in the center of the screen. Now, if I hit my insert key here in NovaMind, we're still kind of branching off to the right. Now, just for the purposes of design, I'm going to go ahead and send them off in the other direction. I don't care whether you agree with that or not. It just makes me feel good. So I'm going to click on, let's just put our first topic in here, just so I have something. And I guess the most obvious thing to put in about the Alethians, can you guess what it would be? They use magic. Because these are our magic people. So I'm going to select this, and let's come over to Map Design, and, it's under Format. Ha! And let's click on the opposite side quadrant. Or do I have to graph this? I'm sorry, I'm kind of new to this application. So it's one or the other. So it was grafted over to the other side.
Zach's a huge iThoughts user, which doesn't actually work here.
Yeah, well, I'm used to touching the screen, and I can't even reach your monitor from here. And like it would do me any good anyway. So now let's jot down some more ideas for the Alethians. So we started off with home planet, so let's do a home planet here too. Home planet, and it stands to reason that they'd be from Elethia. Now, I just totally came up with that name off the top of my head. I Google searched it and didn't find that many references to it. I recommend you do that too, so you're not coming up with an idea that's already really been beat on. But I'm not going to say it doesn't exist out there. All right, now take a look at some of the things we've already put, and I'm going to change the position of these, just kind of keep things a little bit balanced.
Mm-hmm.
So, just for a moment, let me bring this a little bit closer so we can kind of jump in between the two. So we've got our home planet. Now, we defined some sort of form of government over here. Let's do the same thing for these guys. I would like there to be a little bit of common ground. I think it's a cool idea to see that there's a little bit of some shared commonality, whatever, that these two are, experienced with each other to kind of help drive the fact that they are in conflict, but they're really not all that different when you really break it down. So let's give these guys some form of government as well. And what I decided to call these guys is they're governed by the mage lords of the Citadel. And I'm not just making that up off the top of my head right now. It took me some time to come up with that. So if you can't think of something like that and you just want to put, some form of government for, your first start, that's fine. That works. I'll be explaining more of that as we go along. Now, some other things, and let me just make sure, we've got our planet, we've got our government, we've got use high technology. I also want these guys to have planetary colonies of their own. So these guys are also going to have planetary colonies. But that's going to be an interesting thing. The reason I do that is because I don't want our game to be unbalanced. So again, I'm having to balance two tasks right now. I'm defining a story, but I'm also trying to keep the game in mind while I work. If the Terrans have a bunch of other planets to explore, it only stands to reason the Alethians should have a few too. But we're going to have to make that make sense in the story because I don't want the Alethians to have spaceships. We'll get to that. It's just one of those things you'll have to kind of be aware of. Now, a couple of other things. Now, this will... Oh, didn't mean to make another floating topic. I just clicked on the wrong thing. This will probably unbalance things by just a little bit, but again, I don't want you to focus too hard on the balance. If you have an idea, go ahead and get it out there. Their magical powers come from a crystalline substance. Crystal. We'll just say it come from a crystal. And I'm going to give this a name now, and it took me forever to come up with this. Well, okay, not that long. Arcanicite. So this is going to be a crystal substance that permeates the planet itself. So yeah, there's a throwback here that you could say, oh, well, that's just like Avatar. Okay, kinda, sure. But the powers that the Alethians are going to have is going to come directly as a relationship to being near this crystal. Now, these guys have a little bit of a history that they're still dealing with, so to speak. And where the Terrans dealt with an energy crisis, and to get where they are, it only stands to reason. If mankind is united under a single government, you could almost take it for granted that it costs some blood to get to that point. Well, the Alethians have kind of done that as well. They have, in the last few hundred years, they've been through what we're going to call the Mage Wars. And the reason that's going to be important is that I want to be able to have some good and evil on both sides of the fence. I don't want people to get the idea that the Alethians are the good guys and the Terrans are the bad guys. It's really not that way. I don't want people to get that idea right off the bat. I think that's horrible. It's a terrible way to try to balance things out. So, now at this point, if you get these kind of things in place and you're like, okay, well, I've got some really generic ideas down. Where do I go from here? Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Pick on one and just start breaking it apart. What I'm going to do is kind of fully explore a web work for the Terrans.
Okay.
And then we'll jump back over and we'll go deeper into the lore and what's going on with the Alethians from there.
Okay.
So, the planet Earth. Let's talk about the planet Earth. I'm going to hit the insert key and make a subtopic here. So, largely populated. Lots of folks, obviously. Actually, we can just leave it right there. And then we can say high tech. Now, I'm stealing this term. It's been out there, but when I write it out, you'll know exactly what it means. Mega cities. We all know what a mega city is, right? We've seen enough sci-fi stuff to know that you get that city sprawl that just kind of goes on forever and looks like Blade Runner, and it's probably grungy and dingy, and nobody's really happy living there, but they do anyway. Now, another really important thing that's going to come up is natural resources. They're at a dangerous low.
Okay.
Now, I don't want this to be like, it doesn't necessarily have to be like everything is just the slums and we barely have enough, energy to live, that sort of thing. But it does need to be a precarious situation, a delicate balance that's being maintained right now. Now, let me zoom in a little bit on my my notes just for a second. All right. Now, another one is society. And I'm just actually going to branch off of this. So don't be afraid to make as many branches as you feel you need to. So society, relatively peaceful. At least now. There's the government versus, and we'll just call them terrorist factions. I don't want that to make you think they're the bad guys, though. Actually, let's just say resistance. Government versus resistance. It's just a classic example.
Versus the corporations.
Yeah, actually, I wouldn't even go there. And this is just in my vision, government and corporations might as well be the same thing.
Okay.
Because no government is going to be able to withstand the amount of money these corporations have.
Okay.
So government versus the resistance. And if you wanted to, you could actually say, as I misspell again, love you guys. So government is going to be more or less equals corporations. They pretty much control everything. And we already see that to this day. You get these big companies that have a lot of money to swing, and they put lobbyists in to help drive their means in. So what happens, years and years and years down the road, when the corporations actually have all the money and the government's more or less bankrupt? Mm-hmm. The corporations start making all the rules, and then at what point do you decide, well, who's really running the show? So it's a corporate government. So these are just some of the important things about Earth itself. Now, there are conflicts. I don't want people to think, oh, well, everything is, like Star Trek where, we've cured hunger and everybody's all happy and there's no money. But I also don't want everybody to get the idea that, oh, well, it's in a constant state of war. It's not really like that. Mm-hmm. People are generally unified, but I don't think you'll ever get humans to ever, completely agree to anything. So while the government has more or less dominated humanity, there's still some fighting, infighting going on. And I think that's relatively natural. Probably not as natural as it should be. If it really happened, it'd probably be horrific civil war all the time. But that makes it really hard to define a game. All right. Now let's talk about the United Terran Hegemony. Governing body of the planet Earth and its colonies. And that's a really common idea. I don't think anybody's going to have a problem swallowing that one. Cape, great. Came to power after a series of near cataclysmic wars. So, okay, there has been a really serious struggle to get us to this point. And I think that makes a lot of sense, just in terms of an overall history. It's going to have a zealous, near fanatical following. And it would have to. I mean, you'd have to really be a believer to think that all humanity should be following a single body. Now, how that zealous nature is maintained is its own thing. So allegedly uses forms of mind control to maintain power, and you can come up with a million reasons how this could be. I mean, do you drug the water? Are there subliminal messages on TV? Do you just put branding everywhere? I mean, do you live inside the company in which you work? Whatever it is, the minds of the populace are being driven to stay together as opposed to really promoting free thought, that sort of thing. And another important is going to be opposed only by a few splinter factions. And that's something that you could end up exploring later on in the game through other groups that you may have to interact with or do missions for. I'm going to try, because I know NATO's in the room somewhere, I'm going to try not to say the word quests. So I'll say missions. All right. Now, I think that gives us enough of a real basic rundown of our environment. So let's just talk about this high technology that they supposedly use. Now, this is one of those things where you could probably go on and on and on and on for hours. So I'm going to get some really key basics in, and then we'll just kind of move on from there. And if you get lost or you don't know where to go next, remember some of the things you wrote down. And, explore some of those that seem important and branch them out. Just, again, we're just brainstorming here. But already we've got a really nice network that we can follow and see how the idea is evolving.
Yeah. Actually, just interesting thing is this is just the initial brainstorming where really you sat down and based off of stuff we've talked about over time, and then just started pulling everything together and putting all of these various things we've tossed around over the last few months down into a format that can be, said here. But just as a reminder, with this just being the initial story proposal, this will not be the final at all. This thing's going to start taking serious shape once we bring in people like NATO and Andrew and Matt and
that's right,
etc. And our students that want to participate. And then the story. But the nice thing is we're starting from someplace, and everyone is going to get to see how it actually changes from this to what we end up with.
All right. So what are some of the things that we talked about? Well, robotics. I think this needs to be an important factor of the high technology, only because of the doors that it opens up. I mean, you can have robotic NPCs. I don't necessarily ever want to see a robotic player character, though I'm open to the idea of cyborgs or other... Yeah, something that can have human intelligence imbued into it in some form is fine, but I don't picture that as a robot. I picture a robot as some functional machine which does something, even if its function is to try to kill you, or assemble vehicles or something like that. So there's one thing, and we'll just kind of throw that in. Now, let's see. Another big one, and with any sci-fi story that involves robots and high technology, this always comes out, so let's get it out of the way now, and that's artificial intelligence.
Okay.
But I'm not going to call it artificial intelligence at first, and the only reason I'm not is because I don't picture it always being artificial, and I got to use finger quotes when I say that. So what I'm going to call it is electronic intelligence, and you'll see why in just a second. So let's kind of branch off from there. What in the world do you mean when you say electronic intelligence? Well, on the one hand, you have the classic artificial intelligence. Now, the reason I'm breaking all of this down is because I think it could really clearly relate to the story, to the development of players, to the development of NPCs. It opens up a lot of possibilities for missions, for interaction, for back history, for a lot of exploration. So we have the artificial intelligence. Now, here, this is something I totally just came up with, so, that's how it goes. Psychosentience. Sentience. What is this? I'll explain in just a minute. And then finally, we have cyborg intelligence. So I'm avoiding actually adding the word intelligence there. But you could, of course. So let's break down what each one of these means. Artificial intelligence is exactly what you think it is. It's just a program. Programmed. I need to go ahead and move this over so we can kind of read it. Highly sophisticated. In fact, people who talk about AI these days, they don't even like to say the word artificial intelligence. They like to say sophisticated.
Sophisticated? I think you may have...
Oh, I got carried away. It's hard to talk and type.
Yeah, totally understand.
Sophisticated, that mimics human thought. So that's what it is. We've just defined it. Now, what makes it important to our world? Well, it's useful for a lot of reasons because, you could program it, your coders, your programmers could tweak it to perform specific tasks and analyze various problems in specific manners, of course. But I want to kind of draft out here that this would be limited. Or limited. Due to lack of emotional drive. And just as far as I'm concerned, this will always be the reason why we can't ever create true, with finger quotes, artificial intelligence. We can make an analyzing computer that can do all kinds of great things, but we can't ever make it want to live, want to make decisions. There's no drive behind it. But that doesn't mean it's entirely useless. Now, psychosentience. This is a term that I came up with that borrows very heavily from the works of William Gibson. If you read the book Neuromancer, there is a character in there who was a hacker who's been killed, and his entire conscience was downloaded into a computer. And he ends up being used as a character, but he's really kind of a frightening character in the book, because if you shut him down and reboot him, it's almost like he just kind of starts over from the point that he was recorded. And this is kind of what I'm thinking here. This is literally... Let me go ahead and just kind of branch off from there. It's an intricate neural network. Oh, I can't type tonight, guys. I'm really sorry about that. Intricate? That looks right. And I'm using neural network by the actual definition of it, which, I mean, if you pictured the programming of it, it really would be a series of connected nodes, so I'm not just making that up. It's also, let me just put a comma in here. Software, hardware combination. That allows for an entire personality to be downloaded along with all memories and behavior patterns. So it's kind of like making a backup of a human being. We'll just say a download of a human mind. So that's what it is by definition. I think this could be useful just as a story exploration. You could possibly turn this into a player character, but I don't think I would want to. Because I just don't think it... I like, if you're going to make an RPG, you should at least have something you can roleplay. And I don't think any one of us could actually roleplay something that completely restarts when it reboots.
Oh, it'd be interesting. You start off at level 1 every time you start the game over.
Exactly. Exactly. You die and the whole thing just starts over. No! And so here's just kind of some things that I want to throw in that are important to the mythos as far as I'm concerned. Limited in learning capacity, just because of the way they work. They can learn, but it's not quite as well, because I still think as a human being you use your emotions and your emotions are ever changing to really interpret the things around you. And as a piece of software at that point, even though you have all of those human experiences kind of coalesced into code, it's hard to really keep things in check. So another aspect of this, so limited in learning capacity and can become unstable over time. And I really like that, because you could just have entire mission scenarios or whatnot where these things have started to kind of go berserk, or have scenarios where they have to be put down for any number of reasons. And then finally we have the cyborg. And this is something that I think really could turn into a player character, and folks might really dig this, because by definition... this is just a human brain or body part. So we'll kind of go there. Because, I mean, I can picture a cyborg to varying degrees. Wet-wired into a... Yeah, that's a... Okay. Into a computer/machine interface. I mean, not quite the Terminator, because, I mean, the Terminator was actually a robot covered in human skin. This would be like a human being that has been grafted into a machine. RoboCop would be a great example. RoboCop was a cyborg. Now, these, just like human beings, will have a generally superior learning capacity. I mean, they're humans that are, have a machine body. But they have some weaknesses, too. High maintenance cost. You can't just heal, You have to be rebuilt. You have to be repaired. And they're also relatively delicate. And I say relatively because they could be tough as nails, but in the end, there's still a human brain in there. So you can't just jostle it around like you would a really, heavily armored robot. So this is just a quick exploration of electronic intelligence in the world I developed. Now, I understand this may be going a little bit deep.
Actually, we're 53 minutes in with 10 minutes being spent on an intro. This is not deep.
This is not deep at all.
Very light ideas that have been grounded in an idea we've been talking about around here.
What I want to recommend to people is when you're making these mind maps, if something inspires you and you're like, oh, well, this whole idea of AI, you just suddenly have thoughts, get them out.
Yeah.
Even if you end up taking like a block like we have here and it gets really, really detailed, get that out of your system, because there's nothing more frustrating than going back going, oh, I had that cool idea. What was that? Go ahead and explore it as far as you can and make this like a recursive process where once you can't think of anything else, go back up a level and branch down from there. Okay, but what I'm going to do now is let's jump down to some of the other things in our list. Now, we have, let's see, in our high technology area, one of the things we mentioned over here was virtual reality. And I didn't really explore that here, but let's go ahead and break it in because, you know, again, we're kind of recursing through this whole thing. So let's jump down. I'm just going to call it virtual reality. I really hate the connotation that comes with the term virtual reality these days because we all think of, you know, the Lawnmower Man and that really kind of cheesy polygonal stuff. But by definition, this is a reality. You will experience it. It has feel. It has look. It has smell. You're in the middle of it like the Matrix. Even the Matrix was a virtual reality. And I don't want to get into the arguments of what is and isn't real, okay? So let's kind of branch out from here. What are some things that are important to this? Well, let's give it kind of a home, an idea. You know, these days we call our virtual reality, and it might as well be virtual reality for the amount of time we spend on it. We call it the internet, but let's give this a name. You watch like Firefly. I think they called it the Cortex. Of course, in the film The Matrix, they called it the Matrix. Let's give ours a name, just or at least temporarily. So we'll say commonly referred to as the system. So obviously the term the system has changed its connotation over time. It's no longer considered the man. The system is just this great big computer network that you can jack into and experience another world. So this is us literally changing the rules of what we're used to in day-to-day life. This is complete sensory immersion. And an augmented reality. So, you know, when you jack in, yeah, it's going to look real. I want it to look real. I want it to be, you know, things like what you see in Caprica and the Matrix where, you know, oh wow, this is an environment which looks very much like the real world. But then there's other things too that you just can't see in the real world because once you can code to that level, well, you can start making other things that are equally realistic. Another important feature, hacking and data thievery. Big industry in this. Information is power. Stealing information is stealing power. And stealing power is what mankind has always been very good at. So, now how do you go about hacking? Well, that's something we can explore later. But I can picture it being very, very cool. And then just kind of an addendum to that. You could even branch off from this. In fact, let me do that. I wasn't going to at first, so let me undo, and then I'm just going to branch off from here and just say that virtually all digital information. Let me move over, because I can't type like that. When it's falling off the screen, my ability to type just falls out the window. So it's all there, guys. Everything you might want to find is probably available at some point within the system. So, I mean, I picture things like, let's just, one more thing, things like corporations having their own sites. And the term site would actually be a different thing. Maybe there's like an entire city within the system that is just related to this corporation. And, you know, if you want to know more about it, well, there's an informational area you go to. Just let your mind go with that. And if you wanted to really explore that, you could. But I think just even saying something like that is enough to wet the tongue, so to speak. Now, some other bits of high technology that we probably want to look into is weaponry. I mean, we had to get here sometime. Weapons of mass destruction. We're good at this now. We can only imagine we will get better and better and better. That's also going to play heavily into the story, and you'll see why as we go. It's not something that I actually went back and added later, but it's just one of those things where I just picture humanity really just kind of, it's who we are. We always want to see who can kill the best. So, there you go. Now, if you wanted to break into that and, you know, like, what kind of weapons of mass destruction? Do you want to say atomic bombs? Do you want to say beam weapons? Do you want to say satellite cannons? Of course, by all means, do that, but I'm going to keep things relatively simple for now. Let's say we have energy weapons. What do I mean when I say energy weapons? Well, this could be all kinds of things. Kinetic weapons, things like 0-point energy, or, if you want to be able to, the gravity gun from Half-Life. Do you want to pick something up and throw it at someone? That kind of thing. What else? Well, we could have plasma weapons. What do you mean by that? Well, go watch Star Wars. Your pew-pew weapons. In fact, that may be one of those things if you're trying to keep people straight with what you mean. Just say, pew-pew. Folks will catch on to what you mean. By all means, feel free to have fun with these kind of mind maps. Projectile weapons. I don't think the idea of the classic gun will ever go away. We may find different ways to hurl that projectile. Rail guns, coil guns, maybe even some sort of ignition of a force field which drives a projectile forward. But I think we're always going to need to take some piece of material and push it through some other piece of material at a very high velocity. So we'll have projectile weapons in there somewhere. And then just to keep things not only balanced but interesting, again, you got to kind of come back and say, well, what would be cool for a game too, is the world of melee combat. So let's kind of throw this in here. Melee weapons. Now, these can be really, really cool. I mean, you can just start thinking of all kinds of stuff. Like the Star Wars mythology. If you read into the books, they have things like vibroblades, which apparently vibrate at some ultra-high frequency and can cut through anything. If you want to have fun with things like that, by all means, go for it. But I just want to get out on paper there will be some kind of melee weapons. This day and age, yeah, we have the occasional knife. Somebody may mug you at knife point. But when we think of combat, we generally think of people with rifles. And that's probably true, but that does make for very boring gameplay if people are always shooting each other. And I know everybody who plays, like Black Ops just kind of sighed, but there's even a melee button in Black Ops, and there's a reason for it. So, let's say if I absolutely had to branch off this, I like the idea of there being a heavy Asian influence. So that we end up with things, like katanas and, nunchucks and things like that. Because, I'm sorry, we've seen it in so many other sci-fi stories, but one of the biggest industries on the planet right now is China. I mean, they're getting huge, and it really makes sense where as humanity continued to grow and industry got bigger and bigger, there's going to be a lot of that Asian heritage coming through. So let's just go with that. It's been there, it's been done, but it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. So there's some weapons. Now there's other things too that we need to maybe jump back to. So let's say this is...
Just throw one more in there.
Please.
High tech, just so it's there. Just put nanotechnology down.
Oh, yeah, before I forget. Thanks. Nanotechnology. Now, how could this be applied? Oh, man. You could just go on and on and on.
Very good.
Medicine. Augmentation. This could actually be used as a form of a weapon. You've a cloud of these nanites go into a room and start wiping people out or eroding their armor. There's a gameplay mechanic right there. Mm-hmm. So if by all means, feel free to explore that in one go. But probably, in terms of nanotechnology, and I don't say this in a disrespectful manner, but I know there have been authors out there who kind of groan when you say nanotechnology because it's just kind of a high-tech way of saying magic. And I'm fine with that, really. I think that's great. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Terrans can't have health potions. There's no reason why they can't have, nanites that go in their body and reconstruct tissue. That's just cool.
Sure.
It worked in Crisis. Mm-hmm. All right, so we've got nanotechnology. Is there anything else? I mean, I don't really want to go into spaceships and space stations right now. Yeah. Lasers have kind of been talked about. Force fields, maybe not so much, but that's okay. I think we've handled most of the key elements in here. So, planetary colonies. Now, actually, before I even move on, right there, we just saw something. Jason just threw out an idea, and we just augmented our little mind map. Please don't be afraid to do that. Now, I'm presenting this in a pretty straightforward manner because we're on a video and because I've already kind of taken some notes, and I want to give you guys some perspective. Please don't think this mind map was actually created this way for the very first time. But if I created it the way it originally was, this video would be 8 hours long. So... or more. So let's just, you got to kind of understand there's a bit of a process sort of behind the scenes, but I'm trying to give you some perspective. So the Terrans have planetary colonies. How on earth did they get there? Because we already know there are no habitable planets we can find within a relative travel distance we could manage in this day and age. So we've got to be able to say that we have some form. We utilize faster than light travel. And Albert Einstein, sorry, this is where we give you the finger. We have to be able to do it because we have to be able to get to places that humankind just can't even imagine right now. This is where we get to our galaxy far, far away, so to speak. We have to be able to jump. And if you'd like to sit down and explore, how does that happen? Does it take place kind of like the Battlestar Galactica jump from one location to another kind of thing? I like that, personally. Do you want it to be more like Star Wars, where you literally get propelled at some tremendous speed, or like Star Trek, where you hit like Warp 9 and go, engage, that sort of thing? But I just want to make sure everybody realizes we have faster-than-light travel. We transport, and this is where I had to get into spaceships, by large carrier vessels. Terraforming. Of course, humans can't just find an area and say, oh, well, this is great, let's just preserve it as it is. We always got to leave our footprint, leave our mark, change things, and destroy stuff. So there's going to be terraforming. Taking a planet that is near habitable and making it habitable. It's just what we do. So terraforming will be an important thing, and you can tie that into so many things with industry and story, and what corporations are pushing terraforming and how they're sabotaging each other, and it just opens up so many different opportunities. Now, a good idea here, and it's not something I'm going to do now, but it might not be a bad idea to take a moment if we're really trying to push this to a more finalized area, and you make a list of what colonies the Terrans have, and you could branch out from there. What are the characteristics of that colony?
Sure, but
again, we're not going that far.
Yeah, just as a reminder, at the beginning we were laying out this initial proposal with the different areas that we are exploring, but we're still keeping these from getting too deep, just so that as we talk with students and some of our other developers, and we just start refining the story, and we see what parts stay, what parts change, what new elements get added at this level, and then from there we begin the iterative process of refining.
So now we get to the midst of an energy crisis, which is, this all ties into the Arcanosite crystals, which are giving our Alethians their magical power. Seeking Arcanosite as a new power source. And I mean, there is the pivotal part of how these two peoples ended up crashing into one another. And that's pretty much it. That is a breakdown of our Terran side of the map. So we can take this and we can just kind of slide it over here. And this really kind of defines our sci-fi people, so to speak. And you could, of course, take this and branch off it in all kinds of different
loosely,
directions.
and again, not highly detailed. I mean, some of you out there may be viewing this as, whoa, that's a lot of stuff.
I don't even think I've scratched the surface of the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
So now we get to move over to our fantasy people, the Alethians. And I hate to do this on video, guys, but I absolutely have to get something to drink.
Oh, that's
because I've been yakking now for like an hour. All right. So let's talk about these guys. Now, again, I like there to be some sort of visual balance as best I can, but I don't want that to be a critical factor. Let's just kind of start from the top and work our way down. Let's talk about the home planet of Alethea, because that's the first thing on our list. So the way I picture Alethea is, it's almost like stepping into a slightly more magical version of Middle Earth. It's very, very pretty. I want it to feel civilized, not necessarily high tech. I don't want people to start relating civilization and technology. The two are not related. The Romans had a high form of society with, the Senate and who was controlling what parts of the country, and there was a lot of politics. That's high society, but it's in no way technological by today's standards. They did have aqueducts, though. So let's say we have, I'm trying to find my place in my notes real quick. The people are highly civilized, but limited technology. And I mean really limited. Why? Because they don't need it. These people have had magic their entire existence. And just try to picture yourself. If you could use magic to lift objects, to light fires, to teleport yourself from one place to another, to fly, how much easier would your life be, and how many stupid gadgets that you use on a day-to-day basis could you just completely do away with? And the answer is many and more. So they're not very technological, mostly because they don't have to be. But they do have some things that you might expect in a fantasy world. They have things like steel armor, primitive weapons. And I don't want you to look down your nose at primitive weapons. I'm talking swords and pole arms and bows and arrows and axes and things. But I also want to kind of branch off of this and just say these have been imbued with magic as well. Why is that important? Well, think about it. If you get a knight in shining armor with the killer sword you've ever seen in your life, and he marches out on the battlefield, but across the way is a sniper with a really cool rifle that can hit a target from 600 meters, who's going to win? The sniper, every single time. But this is where our magic element can come in. I mean, you could have magical armor, which protects them from that sort of thing to a limited degree. Makes them a lot harder to kill. So, even though their weapons are primitive, their armor is primitive, their magic is going to give them an edge. So let's kind of go on from here. What else? Well, they're going to have a planet that is dominated by a feudal system. So, feudal system, but they're going to pay a kind of a global homage to the mage lords. So again, that central governing body that we discussed earlier. So there's going to be a lot of little villages, state-like areas that kind of control themselves. They have their own council, but they're all pretty much dominated by the mage lords. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is coming soon. Now, we can also talk about the source of the planet itself is the source of this crystal. So it's the source of Arcanasite. So you're also kind of tying into and borrowing a little bit of stories like Dune, where, remember you had the planet Arrakis, which had the spice, and the spice was, the driving force behind commerce and everything. Well, we have a little bit of that too, because this Arcanasite can be used, or we've come up with a way to use it in machinery as a power source. So that's important. It also seems to have these magical abilities. That's also important, but only this planet's got it. And so that makes things very complicated. So there's a quick rundown of the planet of Aletheia. And of course, again, this is just keeping things very simple. I'm sure you could go on for hours and days about all kinds of things tying into that. But let's move down the list and we'll talk about the Mage Lords of the Citadel, this governing body, which in a lot of ways is going to be kind of analogous to the United Terran hegemony across the way. So there is kind of a relationship there. So what are the Mage Lords of the Citadel? What is this body? This is an enclave of magical warriors and their descendants, because these guys have been around for a while. I'm probably going to misspell that. Maybe I didn't. Now, I want this to have that image of, I'm just going to put this in quotes, those of the pure blood, the bloodline mentality. These are the people who descended from the original mage lords, and that's how they get their power. That sort of the God-given right mentality that we saw in monarchies even here on Earth. It's something we can relate to as being primitive, but still being powerful, as long as people are willing to accept it. And these are some very powerful mages, users of magic. But why? I mean, why are they here? What has caused them to get into the position they are? Well, these guys and gals saved the planet during the Mage Wars. Mage Wars, thank you. From the terrors of the Mage Wars. And the Mage Wars are something that have their own heading. So we'll just kind of keep that in mind. We'll talk more about the Mage Wars a little bit later.
Now, I do want to interrupt for just a second and let everyone know, and Uzak, that Mr. Chris Morris just asked a question, and that is, how alien do you see these guys as being, biological-wise?
Well, because, and this is something that would be really, really up for debate. Mm-hmm. I would like them to appear human.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is, I think there's, and I could be totally wrong in this, is one of those things that is certainly up for debate. But I really feel like when you give something new and kind of exciting to a physical form, people are going to automatically be drawn to that. And I think magic is already going to be kind of an imbalancing factor in a way. Everybody likes magic. I'm sorry. Everybody wants these superpowers. That's why we came up with nanotechnology for the Terrans. But I also like, from a story level, the idea that these are two races, two groups of people that have a whole lot in common. In form, in history, in their development. They're divided only by the space in between them and how they've changed and how they've evolved. But I want it to actually look like well, why can't we just get along and be brothers? Where we're both human in nature and in form. That's kind of the look I'm going for. But that's just my idea.
Right.
What I'm afraid of, and this is just why I decided on that when I was kind of thinking my way through the idea. You give people a choice between humans and elves. What are most people going to choose?
Well, that's really hard to say.
I know.
I mean,
in my head, though, my beliefs, everybody wants to be the long-eared elf. It's just something new. If you give people the choice between humans and the Na'vi, what do you want to be? You want to be the Na'vi because they're new and they're interesting, and it's just that kind of get out there and try something you've never seen before mentality. And so that's why just right now, with the idea that I've got, I would like them to be human. But that's one of those things that everybody has ideas or aspects of their ideas that they're willing to really fight for. And you get out your axe and say, "You shall not pass." But this is not one of them.
Right.
This is one of those ideas that I just in the original draft I see them as being human, but I could see them being different as well.
Okay.
So I'm not quite on the fence, but there you go. I think that makes where I stand fairly clear. Okay, so we're here. We just talked about how these folks saved us from the Mage Wars and are now the controlling, governing body. Yes, there's a feudal system in place. Yes, there are little regions that kind of do a limited form of self-government, but they still follow the mandates of the Mage Lords and that sort of thing. So now, another kind of important aspect is that the Mage Lords themselves are feared and worshipped. And in some cases hated by the Alethians. Which again, I think ties into a very understandable form of the human condition. There's always going to be those folks who really believe in a great leadership, and always those who just rebel against any form of authority whatsoever. So that's just kind of a very, very, very high level of the Mage Lords themselves. Just enough for you to kind of know who and what they are and generally what they represent. Now, when we talked about the technology branch over here on the Terrans, we kind of went off in a lot of different directions. And it only stands to reason that we do something vaguely similar over here with the use of magic as opposed to technology. So let's break this down a little bit. I would like to kind of just delineate this into some different types of powers. And I'm not opening this up to, hey, your definition of this type of power is wrong because in this book by Gary Gygax, blah, blah, blah. This is just the initial idea. So if I make any of you have to grab a vomit bag because I say something about a certain type of power, don't think too hard about it. It's just an initial go at the idea. So we're going to have elemental powers, control over things like fire. Oh, I tried to hit enter. Water. Hit enter twice, by the way, to get that new subtopic. Air, earth, and those are the big ones to me, for the elements. And then, let's see, does this work? Nope, that's not the one. I'm trying to... No, okay, I'm just going to click back up here. I think there's a hotkey to make a branch from directly above, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. Now, another branch of powers... I'm going to list off as arcane powers. And here's just how I'm defining those. So, again, if you whip out your RPG dictionary and start wanting to throw things at me, refrain. We can always rename these later. But this would be powers over time and space. Things like teleportation, freezing time, moving faster, that kind of thing. Extra dimensionality. And you might be thinking, well, how does that differ from control over time and space? Well, if you picture control over time and space allowing you to slow down time around you or to speed yourself up, and maybe control over space being, control over matter, maybe something like telekinesis. And maybe teleportation falls under being able to step through from one dimension to another. There's all kinds of ways that you can start to explore that. But this kind of metaphysical approach, energy manipulation, which could also tie into telekinesis, or maybe the deflection of heat or energy in some form, bending light maybe. And another one would be telepathy, which could utilize any one of these, coordinating directly with the brain to allow you to think thoughts to one another, to communicate over long distances, all kinds of things. But it would give them a bit of an advantage in a lot of ways. Now, what are some other powers? Well, I like the idea of there being some sort of transfiguration. I mean, because the Terrans have cyborgs. You could take on all kinds of forms if you could have a machine body. I mean, you could literally turn yourself into a quadruped if you wanted to. And there's no reason why you couldn't. So let's give the Elethians some ability to change their form as well. So what can we do? Well, of course, there's the standard, which, shape-shifting. The ability to reorganize matter. I'm just going to let your brain play with that one. If you want me to explain it, I'll come up with some things. But, maybe not entirely transforming yourself, but transforming other things as well. Maybe only transforming a part of your body. You could also argue that has to do with maybe healing yourself. You're literally reconstructing parts of your own body, that sort of thing. So now there's another branch too, and I'm just going to call this forbidden powers. Now this is going to tie pretty heavily into the history of Alethea, because I don't want anybody to get the idea. I think I said this earlier. I don't want there to be the Elethians are the good, noble, and just people because they use magic and they're so pure. No, there's some pretty bad stuff that goes into magic as well, and that was actually one of the causes for the Mage Wars. And let's go ahead and just put that in there. Major cause for the Mage Wars, because there's a lot of power to be had in these forbidden powers, and they're just kind of considered evil and taboo, and that was one of the key reasons for the massive conflict itself. But what are the forbidden powers? Well, necromancy, which is literally the control of the dead. Things like, now this is a term that I'm just kind of coining here. Death-bringing spells. Spells that literally just kill you. I don't mean cause damage. I don't mean rip your heart out. I mean literally your life force is just extinguished by this. Think of Avada Kedavra from Harry Potter. That sort of thing. I mean, that's horrible. It's an abomination to use magic to do that sort of thing. Let's also look at blood magic. Things like, blood rituals, the sacrifice of another person and using the power that comes with something that evil to make yourself more powerful and maybe augment yourself. So, I mean, that's just a horrible branch of magic that has caused all kinds of problems in the history of Alethea. Now, there's more to it than that. I don't want it to just be necromancy. Things like soul stealing. If we consider that maybe there is a magical force that helps drive you as a person, maybe there is something kind of like a quote-unquote soul, and you could take that from someone else and use it to fuel your own powers. That would be horrible to do that to anybody else. So it would be classified as a forbidden power. And then things like mind control. I mean, to really to take over someone's mind and make them just literally experience something that they have no control over whatsoever. A horrible power that could just do so many damaging things. All right, so that's just a quick rundown of spells and powers. Once again, just like with technology, that's something you could branch off of all day and all night for days and days and days on end. So, all right, planetary colonies. We put this in here as a balancing act because we can't just have the Terrans having colonies of their own or nobody else. So these the Elethians, they don't have, and I got to put this in quotes, space travel in ships. They don't do that. They don't have a spaceship. They lift off into the stars, that sort of thing. What they do have is what I'm going to call observers. And literally in the back of my head, I picture, the wizened old wizard with some sort of cool telescope object, or some sort of magical item that allows him to see deep into the stars to places where where other Elethians could possibly go and explore. And so, using a combined massive effort, they teleport themselves. So you could say teleportation to other worlds. But at the same time, that is already a horrifically unfair advantage right there. Because you don't want people to go like, well, why was there even a war? Because the Elethians could have just teleported directly to Earth's capital with an army and ripped everything apart. This is not to be taken lightly. This would be the kind of thing where the combined efforts of all of the mage lords and half the planet might get a very small group of people onto another world so that they could explore and start building something up on their own and start communicating. So let's just say very difficult. So they do have colonies, but they're a little different to manage, so to speak. All right, so moving along. So these folks are dependent upon Arcanocite for their powers, but I don't want them to really dwell on that. They've grown up and evolved, always being around this Arcanocite. So do they, do they just, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose it I'm going to lose my powers if I don't keep this stuff on me? Not at all. They take the Arcanocite not quite for granted, but it's just always kind of been there for them. But there are some important things to keep in mind. I do want their powers to diminish over generations away from the Arcanocite. And the reason I work this in is that you could, if you really wanted to, turn that, and this kind of ties into, I know I'm going off in a lot of different directions here, but this ties into one of the other reasons why I thought it might be cool to make the Elethians vaguely human. Because if over generations you lose your magical abilities as you're away from Arcanocite, who's to say that millennia ago the Elethians didn't see Earth and send a small party to it, but then lost contact with them, and then those eventually evolved into the humans we know now? You could explore that if you wanted to. But some other important things about this crystal. So Arcanocite is viewed as a sacred stone or a sacred material. It's not something where it's just, every bauble and trinket that you see is going to have this stuff on it. You don't just, you don't build toilets out of it, that sort of thing. It's taken pretty seriously. But the wealthy, powerful, and influential people will have hordes of it. Hordes. Thank you. And that's that also kind of ties into the spice mythos that you might recall from like the Dune series. The very powerful people they always try to keep their own horde of the spice. Same thing. All right, now we need to talk a little bit about the Mage Wars, because those are kind of the reason why the Elethians are in the current state that they're in. Now, what were the Mage Wars? The first thing I would definitely throw in here would be some sort of a definition. I'm going to use the term ancient fairly lightly here because I'm only picturing the Mage Wars happening a few hundred years ago. But, everything's up in the air right now anyway. Between the Mage Lords and the Necromancers, or those who use forbidden magic. It literally was the power of good magic versus evil magic, right out of a story. Destroyed a large portion of Elethia's population. So they've had their wars as well. Again, these aren't the happy people that have never known conflict. Not at all. But what the result of this was that this resulted in a small-ish, I'm going to put a small-ish, southern region of the planet being marked off as exile territory. So literally, the greatest crime or the greatest punishment for a crime would be to be exiled to the exiled lands in the south. And that is where the necromancers reside to this day. I mean, while there was a conflict, and while it was pretty horrific, I don't want to give the impression that, you know, now it's the mage lords mercilessly hunting down the necromancers. It's not like that at all. They just banished them from the land. So now they live in the southernmost regions. And we'll just kind of throw in there. Or we call them the Necrolands for sure. You come up with all kinds of cool names later on. Now, another thing, this is just something I like to throw in there, and this could tie into more maybe about the Mage Lords either way, but let me just throw this in. The stories and the history of the Mage Wars are allegedly altered to support the cause of the Mage Lords. Now, why am I throwing that in there? Because I don't want anybody to always have the idea that the necromancers are just pure evil, can't be reasoned with, are horrible, and should be killed on sight. They're people too. They just have their own set of beliefs. And what's gone on is there's been a bit of a smear campaign with the rule of the Mage Lords, and they've really put these people down and given them a highly negative connotation. Yeah, what they do is pretty messed up. But I like there to be that kind of social conflict where it's possible that a mission or an exploration at some point in the game could take you deep into their lands, and you find out that there are villages and people down there who aren't necessarily evil in the traditional sense. I like that. And that kind of ties into maybe a little bit of World of Warcraft, and I'm sure there's other examples as well, but this one comes readily to mind, where you have the undead. Where, okay, they're zombies, they're former followers of the terrible Lich King, but you know, they have their own society, and they're not necessarily here to kill everything in sight. Now, they do have their own plans, and you know, but it gets complicated, and that's what I want. I want it to be a little complicated. And there we have it. We have our two groups, more or less, drafted out to a high level. Now, the question at this point becomes, how do you get these people together? Well, I'm going to define this in a very, very simple manner. You could write books, I'm sure, entire novels, an entire series of novels on how these two groups get together, experience each other, have wars, have relationships, whatever.
Well, can I
please
jump in real quick?
Please. It's a good time for it.
Andrew Thompson asks, what do you have in mind regarding religious beliefs on both sides?
Haven't thought that through.
Okay, that'll be something. That's something that we'll handle as we start getting into the story iterations.
I actually wanted to, because I think the Mage Lords open up a lot of room for that sort of thing. And, like, okay, the other day, I was watching a trailer for the film Priest. And there's that scene right at the very beginning of the trailer, and I don't know if any of you have seen this, but you should go see it if you haven't yet. And I'm not worried about what your religious beliefs are. This was just awesome. We get a guy who goes into a stall that's supposedly like a confession booth, and he looks up at this computer monitor and does the whole, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And this robot CG kind of priest kind of malfunctions and starts trying to give him some sort of advice about saving his soul, but it's clearly not functioning properly. It's just a broken program, and I loved that concept, that you got something as sacred as the idea of religion and saving your soul that's just been hammered into a computer program that has a bug in it. That was beautiful, and I wouldn't mind seeing something like that reflected in the Terrans. Like, perhaps they do have a religion, and perhaps there are those who are very zealous about it, and they really, really staunchly follow it. But it's been diluted by all of this technology, which has kind of worn the human soul fairly thin. I like the way that feels. So I hope that answers the question. So let's kind of make a new branch off that is just a brief overview of the history of the encounter between these two groups. So I'll come all the way back over here to our MMO story elements. So let's go to Insert, and I'll make another floating group, which I'll drag right up here to the middle. And let's zoom in on it. And we'll delete everything out. I'm going to call this the encounter history. And it's right between the two branches. So, and it's literally a description of how these guys came together, so I like the visual look of it. But I just want to say right off the bat, this is going to be kept very, very, very simple. Because, again, I think there's enough rich history here where if one wanted to, you could write novels about this whole thing. All right, so let's start simple. The first encounter between the two. Now, we can't have these two groups, because really what we're defining here, if you haven't caught on yet, are factions. When people play this game, they're going to have to choose one side or the other side. That said, it's going to become clear in just a moment, I do not want, and I got this out of my head real early on, I do not want people to think, oh, these are the pure fantasy people and these are the pure technology people, because I don't want to have to force somebody into that kind of decision. I think it's way too hard of a decision to make, and it could lead to a lot of heavy imbalance. But we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So what kind of things are going to be important in the history? Of course, you have to have a first encounter. You have to have a conflict, which I'm just going to refer to as the Great War. I don't want you to think of World War I. Let's just call it the Great War for now. We're going to have the Armistice. And I already had a name for this. Merlon's Armistice. Merlon is actually a character that I've come up with. I don't expect anybody drafting their own mind map to be able to fire that off real quick. But I'll get to it. Again, there's a little bit of editing here. This whole mind map, as we've already said, is just a toehold. Yes, some work was done off screen to keep this from being any longer than it is, and it's already a long video, as you've seen. And then finally, the years after. Now, I'm going to take the Armistice and graft it over to the other side, and that's just grabbing the little red grafting handle and dragging it to the opposite side. So the way this is going to read is right from top to bottom and then left from top to bottom. If you wanted to go clockwise or anything else, I mean, you could. I'm not going to argue readability. I'm just getting some ideas out and getting something that looks, fairly balanced. So let's start with the first encounter. We'll branch out from here, again, by hitting the insert key. And we're going to have a Terran drone discovers an energy signature. I can't write. I almost wrote that out like cigarette. Did you see that? I don't even smoke. So there you go. We have sniffed out Arcanosite for the first time. A deep space exploration drone. I'm picturing after years of trying its best to discover some sort of resource out there in the cosmos, picks up some signal. I mean, think like pulsars. Pulsars actually put out some sort of an energy signature that we can pick up, and so does this Arcanosite. So our drone picks this stuff up, and let's just kind of fast forward through the history. Terran envoy / exploration team sent to Ilithia. Now, I'm going to jump up one. Bink. Now, this is something I'm throwing in just as part of the fiction. I don't expect anybody to do this, but again, get as many ideas as you can. Drone is spotted by Merlon, who's an observer, the guys we mentioned earlier. And not to go too far into mythos, so Merlon's going to warn the Mage Lords of possible danger, but he's going to be ignored. They're going to disregard the potential danger. In fact, Merlon's going to lose a great deal of his position and influence because of kind of going against what the Mage Lords mandated. Now, so our Terran envoy is sent sometime after the drone reports back with its findings, and then of course we're going to have some months of attempted communication. Culminating finally in a breakthrough. You have to have that moment where finally we can communicate. I do picture these two groups speaking different languages. Even if they did look human, and again, that's in the air, I just want to mention, I don't picture these folks getting off the boat and speaking a common language, shaking hands, let's go play poker. I want it to, it was difficult to establish contact. And we've seen in games where it's very easy for you to have different languages just by kind of encoding what one faction says to the other. So That's easily done. Semi-easily done. So an arrangement is finally brokered. Or let's just say agreement. An accord. I like that. So an accord is reached. Terrans can mine Arcanosite. That's the whole reason they're here. They're here for the Arcanosite. And maybe we should actually put that in. Terran exploration team sent to Alethea. Terrans know there are Alethians. Terrans want Arcanosite. I should start capitalizing that. Preferable non-violent solution.
Yeah, I think your Arcana site happened to have one eye missing out of it.
I think it did. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I put that in is I don't want to give the impression that the Terrans showed up with Marines, guns, bombs, and fighters and just immediately started bombing people to oblivion. It wasn't like that at all. This would have been the first time that humanity discovered another civilization. And I just don't picture us as being the blind conquerors. It's great for sci-fi when somebody's doing it to us, but I just don't picture humans ever being that way. Even when we're greedy. Mm-hmm. We want to figure out what we can learn from these people, get to know them. It changes a lot of things, right? We're not alone. So Terrans can mine Arcanosite, but of course that can't be simple either. Allowed to get it from, you guess where? The Necrolands. So of course the Mage Lord says, sure, you can get your Arcanosite, but grab it from the southernmost regions, from these people whom we've exiled and don't want to deal with anymore. And this is, of course, going to lead to problems and conflicts. Because the necromancers of the southern regions, of course, had nothing to do with this accord. They're just going to see these strange people coming down with these strange machines, setting up shop, tearing their lands apart, and they're going to resist. They're going to fight back. Which brings us to the Great War. Where did the Great War come from? Started with conflicts between Terrans and necromancers. Or the necromantic people, call them what you will. I don't have a solid name for them yet. We just know that they are the people who use forbidden magic and live in the southernmost regions. Wars became costly. Or at least the skirmishes. Let's try not to use wars because the war hasn't really happened yet. These skirmishes became costly. Led to the Terrans mining Arcanosite in more northern regions. Apparently, the necromancers' lands are pretty horrific, and having to mine from that area just wasn't working out so well. So the humans, even though they made the Terrans, after making this agreement, start to branch out. Let's go to an area where we don't have to fight so hard. And of course, this is a breach of agreement. In fact, let me put that up here. Great. So now the two peoples are literally going at each other. On the one side, we have the Terrans who say, we're being treated unfairly. You did say that we could, work together on allowing us to get some Arcanosite, but you didn't tell us that you were sticking us in this terrible area that we're going to have to fight for. And of course, the Mage Lord saying, well, you agreed to go down there. If you start mining it up here, we have a problem, and it just escalates. So, what became of this war? What happened? Well, it's going to be pretty nasty, but obviously the Terrans would be at a huge disadvantage. And why would they be at a huge disadvantage? The obvious reason is supply. You can't keep an ongoing battle going when your enemy is literally, it could be millions or billions of light years away. It's hard enough to get out there, much less keep sending supplies to keep your armies. So, how do you deal with that? threat of weapons of mass destruction. It's real easy to say, if all I need are the minerals on your planet, then keeping you and your planet intact is not necessary, really. I could blow your planet to tiny smithereens and send my drones out to collect what I need from the debris. That would be perfect. So this threat, it kind of leads to a stalemate. The Terrans can't possibly win a conflict over such distances, but the Alethians couldn't possibly defend themselves from the horrific weapons. So they eventually come to what is known as Merlon's Armistice. Merlon, who originally, as we saw, he was the first guy to notice the drone that detected Aletheia in the first place, he becomes the first envoy to the planet Terra, the first Alethian to set foot on the planet and actually talk to people. And what are the details? Well, to keep them simple, end of hostilities, that's going to be the big one. And how do both sides benefit? Because that's going to be the big part of any sort of arrangement like this. Why do you stop a war? Well, there's got to be some sort of mutual benefit to no longer killing each other. Terrans get limited access to Arcanosite mining. The Alethians are taught some of the Terran technology. So, of course, trade is going to open up. Of course, that's going to be a big deal for the corporations of Terra. Not to mention, I don't want you to think there's no such thing as commerce in Aletheia either. I mean, there's all kinds of ways where you can be like, ooh, robots to clean my house for me. Even with magic, that could be pretty handy. What are some ways that we could take a robot and imbue it with magic to make it do even more things? Cooperation becomes an important factor as these two start talking to each other, but that doesn't mean that everything is all candy and roses. So the armistice is reached. Still considerable tension. And that's easy to imagine. The Alethians are going to see the Terrans as these, usurpers who just came into the planet and started taking what is rightfully theirs, no matter what the government says. You don't like to see How would you like to see somebody come into your city and just start mining, even if the government said it was okay to do it? You'd stand at the gates of their little mining facility. You want to throw rocks in there. You couldn't help it. But so there's a lot of tension. But nevertheless, the two societies have started. Thank you. Intermingle. Yeah, I started to write that. There really is a little bit of lag when I type. It's taking me a second to get used to. And I also want to throw this out. I'm imagining roughly 100 years have passed since the armistice. So while all of this stuff that you see here is not exactly ancient history, it's happened long enough ago where there could have been some considerable intermingling here. So we're going to end up with things like magicians. Let's stick with Alethians. We'll just assume they know magic. Alethians who use technology, up to and including cyborgs and hackers and computer people who started their life out as Alethians and have had magic. But we've also started to develop, because of their exposure to the Arcanosite crystals, we have Terrans gaining some magical abilities. And starting to use that in their daily lives as well. But I still want there to be a clear kind of denotation that the Alethians are your hardcore magic race, and your Terrans are your hardcore technological race. There's a little bit of blending in between the two, so that you can have an Alethian who's familiar with the use of computers, but in terms of, and I know we're not supposed to be getting into gameplay stuff, but in terms of very, very generic gameplay mechanics, the higher-end technological benefits would be reserved for the Terrans. The higher-end magical benefits would be reserved for the Alethians. But again, there's a little bit of graying of the water.
Okay.
So let me slide some things around here. There's a lot of influence between the two. Let me just kind of jot that down. I think I've got all the major points, but I didn't want to use the word hardcore, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
Hardcore magic abilities equals Elethians equals Terrans. And that's a rundown of where we stand.
Cool.
That's how we've taken these two very, very different groups and brought them together. And that's the skeletal framework, the very rudimentary skeletal framework for our initial story concept.
That's right. And it's a proposal.
Yeah, that's all it is.
And that's just kind of for old Nelson out there. I mean, it's really just a starting point so that we can then begin altering. We just don't want to get into discussing game and gameplay. Let's get a story in place that we are very pleased with, and then move from there.
Right. Now, a couple of things. For those of you watching this and seeing this kind of thing for the first time, please don't think that the creation of this map took place in exactly the same format you see here. It really took me the better part of a day. And even that is kind of fast.
Well,
really.
and that's also been influenced by
With
things we've talked about.
Yeah,
for
with months of consideration. So, I mean, don't think that you can just sit down and just fire one of these out in a single session. Put some time, thought, and effort into these. But the other thing, too, is allow yourself the ability to change things. And that's what we're going to be doing, too. This is just something to get the ball rolling, so to speak. Now, I do want to go ahead and just say, for anybody who's listening in right now, and there are a few students, is there anything that I've presented that could use further clarification?
Okay, so while
We'll just have to give them a moment to respond.
they get that, because in just a minute we're going to be wrapping this video up, but it's beginning in the next concept video that we will begin, well, really diving into the different areas and making changes, adding things, removing
Taking in
things.
other ideas that I'm sure I didn't consider. Also, just another kind of form of reiteration. The reason this is just a very, very general, high-level skeletal overview is because if I was pushing this as a final idea, this map would be probably 50 times larger than it is right now.
Right. Hopefully, there is no one out there that would think that, you know, this entire thing would be, you know, in an hour's time, here is the whole story.
Right.
When we're looking for something as sophisticated as what we're dealing with here. Let's see, we have Chris Morris asking, do you have a big bad evil guy such as the Lich King or Karazhan that the two sides can come together to fight in a common play area? And I think that's something that we can discuss when we start getting into story iterations.
Right.
There.
I considered it. I actually had a couple of ideas drafted out as, you know, the external evil. That, you know, no player character can join this faction. It's the one reason that we're staying together. And I think there needs to be a common enemy. I really do. Of course, there's already been one suggested, but I didn't explore that very much because I want to get the key themes of these two factions ironed out before we branch out to that common enemy.
Okay, and also we've got Gavin asking about what sort of quantities of our arcanicite are valued, such as how are they valued, micrograms or tons, or and
that's one of those things where I think that's way into the details. That's a lot further in the details that I would want to go. I would say in the tons. This is a very large planet. I actually picture this thing being bigger than Earth, and there's a lot of this material to be had.
yeah, I think as far as
But that's really, really fine detail.
I think framework-wise, I think you were pretty clear on everything, and really at this point we're going to get ourselves into the iterative process where ideas are going to start coming in, or questions that really lead to other ideas. And I want to be careful with that, as that's the whole idea of the next few videos afterwards as we build this up or completely alter this. So we'll go ahead and wrap the video up here. That, you know, gives people almost 2 hours worth of stuff just to see where we're starting at, and then it's going to be interesting to see where we end up with story-wise here, even over just the next few days. So I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this, and again, if you have thoughts, if you have suggestions, please add them into the MMO forums, and we shall we shall be reading all of it. And thank you very much, and goodbye.